I was mentioning something that Mother had said on a show from a number of years ago. I wanted to quote her as well and ask you to respond a little bit. One of the things she said was that the miracles of Jesus were worked not so much as acts of mercy, but as signs of his sonship.
Yep.
Okay.
And signs of his kingdom as well.
Right.
So they are signs of his sonship and signs of his kingdom and bringing the kingdom into the world. Both of them. And of course, the sign of sonship is, Jesus, is saying these things indirectly, right? He calls himself the Son of Man. That's the title that he gives to himself. And of course, what does that title mean? He's referring back to an apocalyptic passage that comes from Daniel 7, and I think it's 7:21, where Daniel recounts that the Son of Man, one like a Son of Man, will be coming on the clouds with all of his angels, right? To accompany him to be the definitive judge of the world. Now, when this this account, of course, means that Jesus is associating himself with the one who comes down from heaven. And by the way, in apocalyptic literature in the intertestamental period, the Son of Man, Daniel's Son of Man, was thought to be a pre-existent eschatological Son of Man. So Jesus is talking about his pre-existence with God. He's talking about being sent by God to the world. He's being sent by God to the world with all of the eschatological dimensions, the angels of God and so forth on his throne, and he's going to be the definitive judge of the world. So these different features, become, in a sense, the kind of the background from which we can see, Jesus' identity. Then, of course, he has to point to his divinity without doing it so explicitly that he's brought up for trial before it's his time, right? So after his third year of ministry, Jesus has got this thing timed so that he wants the trial. But he needs about 3 years to preach the fullness of the gospel in Galilee and throughout the lands between Galilee and Jerusalem and in Jerusalem. So he needs this time. So he just can't go out and go, well, as a matter of fact, I am the Son of God. I'm the Son of the Most High. Blasphemy, that would be the end of it, right? And so, of course, he's not going to do that, but he's making big hints. So, of course, he's saying that Isaiah's prophecy is fulfilled in him, in their hearing, right? The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the dead will be raised to life, etc. So he's already talking about being the fulfillment of the Spirit of God coming into the world through him, and of course him being not only the Messiah, but the divine Son. He's also hinting by saying that he can definitively defeat evil. He's also hinting by saying that the kingdom of God will come in his own person. And of course he's also hinting, as Mother Angelica just said, by performing these miracles in his own name. This is where Mother Angelica is right on the marker, because it is revealing he is the divine Son. As I just said before, no other prophet ever proclaimed that he was going to do a miracle by his own power and authority. Only Jesus does this. And the clear hint is that Jesus possesses the power over life and death, the power to heal in his own person, and can proclaim it on his own without making recourse to God or his Father. He basically then is proclaiming. And of course, if he didn't have this power, the whole idea, right, that Jesus didn't know he was the Son of God, right? As some theologians come out and they make these cavalier statements. As I always said, then if Jesus didn't know he was the Son of God, he would have never attempted an exorcism, a healing miracle, or a raising from the dead by his own power and authority, by saying it on his own. Because if he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise," and he didn't have divine power within himself, it would have been very embarrassing wrong, because the young man would not have gotten up. Something would have been wrong. Jesus would have never taken this chance unless he was absolutely sure that that power resided in himself. So the idea, that he didn't know is almost, for me, it's a funny thought. But the point that I'm trying to get to is, does that also manifest his divine power to others, not just himself? Absolutely.
Right.
The Pharisees know.
They got it.
This guy is doing things that are like divine power residing within him. And that's why Jesus says, I have the authority to change or modify Torah in my own person. I have the authority to forgive sins in my own person. So what is easier to say? Son, your sins are forgiven, or to say, pick up your mat and walk? Well, in order to prove to you, in other words, that I have the authority of God within myself, that I'm the divine Son, I'm putting that, words in Jesus' mouth because they're parenthetical implications, right? In order to show you, I say to you, young man, pick up your mat and go home. And he goes home. And I'm telling you, there's already, all these implications are there. Now, he does tell his disciples very directly that he is the Son of God, right? When he raises his eyes to heaven, right? Remember that very, pronounced Q logion. A logion from the Q source is one that's mentioned in Matthew and Luke, but it's not in Mark or in John, right? And it's it's an identical source in Matthew and Luke. And in there, Jesus raises his eyes to heaven and he thanks, and he uses the word Abba, 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 which is very distinctly Jesus. That's the first thing is this, is ipsissima vox of Jesus, the real voice of Jesus, because he's using the Abba pronouncement, which is characteristic of him in the history of Judaism. And then he goes on to say that no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him, right? So, of course, the beginning of that, he says, no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son. So I know the Father as the Father knows me. Now, the word know for a Hebrew is not the same as it is for a Greek. For a Greek, the word know means probably a mental abstraction, a calling to mind, a memory. Right. Knowing for a Hebrew is literally an intimate, interpersonal knowing. And of course, what Jesus is claiming is, I have intimate interpersonal knowledge, that is to say, connection and relationship with the Father as the Father has with me. He has equality with the Father. Now let's go through that whole logion. Jesus turns to heaven and he prays, I thank you, Father, for what you have revealed to the learned and the clever. You have revealed what you've hidden from the learned and the clever. You have revealed to the merest of children. Yes, Father, you have graciously willed it so. Everything has been given over to me by my Father. What does that mean? All power and authority of the Father, it resides literally in Jesus. He is the Son. And no one knows the Son except the Father. And no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. In other words, I have full divine power in me. I am in a relationship of such intimacy with God that I know him as he knows me. In other words, I'm the Son of God. Now, Jesus tells that to his apostles, and he prays this to the Father before his apostles. But outside of that intimate company, Jesus has to hint at it. But I think the most, the definitive hint, of course, comes, in the parable, of the wicked vintners, or the wicked tenants, right, where Jesus, of course, says he's the stone rejected by the builder. He's the Son, the only begotten, beloved Son of God in the parable, with all the rest of the people in the parable being the prophets and so forth. Right. Now, finally at the trial, the priest said, okay, are you the one,
Right,
and
right,
Jesus,
yeah.
and
Yeah, right.
and you're going to see the Son of Man. And then he goes right back to the Daniel passage, and he says, I am the fulfillment of this passage, to which, of course, the high priest tears his clothes. And, of course, we get the definitive message when Jesus wants to reveal it to the world.
Right.
So, in a sense, there's no question that what Mother said is correct, because any Pharisee during that time would have recognized this guy is really different from every other prophet,
let me ask
and
you
they
just
would have
before we go,
recognized
just
the
before we
emphatic
go,
ego.
because we're
Yeah.
just like running out of time here because there's so much
Oh,
good
sorry.
stuff. Let me ask you as a follow-up to that. A lot of people
Sure.
would want to know, and maybe this is the reason it was this way, why didn't Jesus heal everyone he met? Was it because of the fact that it was a sign of sonship versus mercy, or why? Why wasn't everybody he bumped into on the road healed? Why didn't he spend 24
Well,
hours
first
a
of all,
day, 7
Jesus-
days a week healing people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jesus did heal a lot of people whom he met. And there's no question people would bring, all these, the sick, the lame, into the marketplaces just to be touched by him. And we're assuming that many of them were healed just by touching. Recall, though, that there are these other three features that always must be in place in order for Jesus to heal. First, the person in question has to have the faith that Jesus not only can heal, but will want to heal. The second thing that has to be in place is that healing has to be good for the salvation of that person, or that person's ability to help others towards salvation. So if the healing is going to hinder, that salvific prospect is going to hinder Jesus' main purpose, namely to save us and to help us save others, then that healing is not going to happen. Wild horses will not make it happen. And the third condition that has to be met is it can't interfere with the freedom of the person in question or the freedom of others in question.
Okay.
So if those three conditions are met, then I think, Jesus could pretty much heal everyone. But, and his purpose, of course, is if people do have faith, if it's not going to be an impediment to salvation, if it's going to be a sign of God's kingdom coming into the world, it's not going to interfere with human freedom, then Jesus will heal. And of course, that's part of his mission.
Right.
And he does it prolifically, but also part of his mission too is to preach the good news, and part of his mission is to give himself self-sacrificially for the world in a complete and unconditional act of love.